Welcome to A Better Divorce podcast, where we have conversations about the emotional, financial, and legal issues that are on your mind or should be on your radar if your goal is to keep your divorce out of court. I'm collaborative divorce attorney and mediator Andrea Vacca, and I know that how you divorce matters to your long-term well-being. That's why it's my mission to help you have a better divorce with as little acrimony as possible, so that you can create the best life possible on the other side of your marriage. Hello, everyone. I am happy to welcome Leda Mitrofanis to the podcast today.
Hello, Andrea.
Hello.
Thank you for having me.
It's so good to have you here, Leda. So Leda is a self-development counselor, a teacher, and author, and the founder and director of Simply Leda. She's also the author of a 4-book series called The Human Case of Mistaken Identity. And 2 books are out already, correct, Leda?
That's
and
correct.
two more are coming out next year.
Yes, 25.
2025. It's almost here. So welcome to the podcast. You know, on our last episode that we put out, it was an expert on betrayal. And so we talked about betrayal and how to not letting that define you and how to move on, and, you know, even in spite of betrayal. But grief is obviously one of the emotions that follow betrayal. So this is actually coming at a great time to be talking about grief, which we're going to be talking about today. So first, I just want to get clear on what exactly is grief. I mean, we've all heard the word, we've felt it, but, you know, can we just talk a little bit about what it is?
So grief is the emotion that we have, or it's actually many emotions that we have following a loss. And that loss could be loss of a loved one. It could be loss of relationship in the case of divorce. It could be when we move to another country or city. It could be loss of a job or a career. So loss is defined in many different ways, but the grieving process is the same, no matter what the loss. It differentiates in terms of what the loss itself is. But grieving is defined in 7 stages, right? As we know, and anyone who looks it up can see that. And so those 7 stages, the shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, those are a cyclical process. And those are the emotions that we're going to be, you go through. And sometimes you'll have better days and sometimes you'll have days that are not so great, depending on where in the process you are at any given moment, right? And the key is to remember it's not linear. You don't go from one to the other.
Do you have to go through all of them at some point, though?
You usually do. Sometimes, most of the times, people don't label it as such because when the feelings hit, they can be so overwhelming. But yes, you do tend to go through them at least once.
At least once, maybe more than once, because you're going backwards and forward.
Yes, because it's cyclical. So, one minute you can feel the shock and the denial, and the next minute you can feel acceptance and feel a little hopeful.
Yeah.
And it depends on what the triggers are too during the course of your day.
So, before the show, we were talking about this, and you mentioned that divorce, you mentioned that, the rule of thumb when you experience grief is not to make any life decisions for a year. But when you're grieving the loss of a marriage, relationship, you're in the middle of it. You're making transition. So, I think that's what makes it so hard for people.
Yeah. So what happens, and this kind of goes back to what we were discussing, when you're getting divorced, the grieving process actually begins before the decision is made to uncouple. And most people don't realize that that's what they're feeling. Sometimes it can be confused with unhappiness, but unhappiness is a sense of unfulfillment, whereas grief is a sense of sadness for what we feel we already know is going to come to an end. And the feeling always becomes before we verbalize it, before we articulate it, first to ourselves and then with our spouse when we start making those decisions. Many times when people are in the process, there's so much to deal with, right? Custody or moving or finances. and the emotions of grief kind of get crowded out a little bit because the focus is on the logistics, and we call that delayed grief. But it's still there, and it's still underlying, and it's still running kind of like a computer in the background a little bit.
Right. Yeah. So you're expected to move forward and make decisions and be at your best and go to work, take care of your kids, end your marriage, and you've been sad, you've been trying to bargain probably, you've gone through all
Right.
those stages and you're still going through it. And you have to make some smart decisions. And that's why in the work that we do in the collaborative divorce process, we want mental health professionals on the team because it's really hard to make these decisions when you're grieving and you're not supposed to be looking like you're grieving because you have to keep moving forward. I think when somebody has been betrayed or been told by their spouse they want a divorce, it's easy to see that they're grieving. But it might be hard to accept that you're grieving when you make the decision, when you've been unhappy all these years.
Right.
You've decided to end the marriage, but you can still grieve that marriage, even though it is your decision. And
That's correct. And sometimes that's even harder because when you're the one that ends it, maybe you have a certain clarity for yourself that the other person does not yet have. And but making that decision to step out, you know that there's going to be hurt involved. You know that all of these emotions, frustration, resentment, confusion, exhaustion, it's all going to come to the surface. And dealing with that, not just for yourself, in addition to being the one that carries a responsibility that says, I'd like to end this. I'd like to put a period here. And that's, so that's a little extra responsibility on top of maybe the other individual who might be still in shock or denial.
yes, it's different. You're grieving in different ways.
Right.
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 I think some people, they fight, they fly,
Yeah,
fight or
absolutely.
freeze, right? And
Right.
that
So, oh, I'm sorry.
no, it's okay. No, I mean, like, those are the action, like, people, you'll see it in different ways. It shows up in different ways in the
Yes,
divorce.
grief can show up in many different ways. Absolutely in anger, which we see in resentment is always common, but it also shows up in confusion, frustration. It shows up in our inability to cope with, everything that's happening all at once. Um, it also shows up as sadness, obviously. It can also show up as silence
Yes.
in those who just don't want to communicate at all and just say, okay, whatever, just let's move on. Let's do it.
Or I don't wanna engage at all. I'm
Right,
not going to
right, right,
negotiate. I'm not gonna work with you. I'm not going to talk to I'm not gonna find a lawyer, and so it makes everything harder because they're not dealing with all their grief,
right. There's
and
an inability to cope. And sometimes because they're not ready, they stay locked in the battle to
yeah.
prolong what is the inevitable
Yes.
because it allows them to still hold on and go through the process. In other words, internally, their internal process of, kind of making sense of what's happening and all the aspects of it.
As a divorce attorney, we often see that people will stay engaged in conflict to stay connected, like, they don't wanna
Yes.
let the marriage go
No.
because
Yeah.
this is comfortable.
Yeah.
It's terrible, no one's happy, but it's their norm, They fight, they're locked in conflict, and I never really thought about that it's grief, it's probably a reaction to the grief too, like, not
Yeah.
wanting to feel everything you're gonna feel once it's over. I thought it was just more comfortable, but I think it's deeper than that.
It is, well, it is comfortable. There's a comfort zone, right? When you're married with someone, especially for many years. But it is deeper than that. Letting go kind of brings me to something I want to share. And that is when we're grieving, we're not just grieving the relationship per se, we're grieving the piece of ourselves that was in this relationship, the piece of our identity that was in this relationship. Because what we're grieving is that when the marriage ends, we feel that that piece of us breaks away and it's a loss. So the loss is the relationship, and the loss is the piece of yourself, of your identity that was all wrapped up in this relationship as well. And that's a very, very deep loss. And most people don't recognize that.
Yeah. And they don't acknowledge it for themselves or their spouse, that just admit it, acknowledging that you both went into this marriage probably expecting to be together forever and to be a certain kind of spouse and to show up in a certain way and to have be loved and love others. You don't go into it thinking you're going to end like this. So um, loss of that relationship, of your sense of family, of your role in the family, the extended family, your community, like everything is shattered as when you put yourself in as this is how I am. I am a married person in this relationship. I'm a parent
Right,
who
because
lives with
that's
their
how you're
children.
identifying. And
Yeah.
so what happens now is suddenly that manner in which we're identifying has to change. So the question is, well, who am I? How am I going to be? How am I going to move forward? Who am I going to become moving forward? What is my life going to look like when I have had all of these dreams, all of these hopes, and I had an expectation and a picture of what my life would look like as a married person with family, or whatever all the parameters of the marriage are. And suddenly when we lose that piece of ourselves, there's this feeling of a lack of wholeness,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that feeling of a lack of wholeness is attached to a sense of hopelessness. And then the feelings of, who am I now? Really, who am I without this marriage?
Not
And we
feeling like
start
it'll
to
never.
ask,
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, those are the questions and there's a fear. There's a really palatable fear. Some people fear being alone. Some people fear they're not going to survive.
Yeah, there's this hole that will it ever be filled? Will I ever be whole
Right.
again? Will I ever be, somebody that can be loved and all those other things that probably come up.
Yeah, a lack of, there's a confusion. Sometimes I feel a lack of purpose, and there's a huge vulnerability around this,
How does
right?
so we've talked about some behaviors that you'll see, you could be angry and fearful, resentment, you check out,
Mm-hmm.
you don't wanna probably acknowledge what's really happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
People procrastinate because they don't wanna feel that the grief. How do you know you're going maybe if you're going through the emotions though, and you're doing all the things and your behavior isn't showing up as grieving, what physically might somebody see that tells them or tells others that you're
Yeah.
you're
So,
actually grieving?
first of all, underneath the grief, we have to remember is pain.
Mhm.
It's pain. And most of the times we don't want to go into the pain. We want to avoid it. We want to just kind of do something else, distract ourselves. And that's why grief works in increments, right? So, and this is important to note because a lot of times, you'll 1 minute you might be, okay, everything is great. I'm going out, I'm doing this. And then the next minute you can't get out of bed. But the physical signs, and there are physical signs, and they show up as fatigue, where you don't want to get out of bed. It can show up as nausea, a lowered sense of immunity. A lot of people tend to get sick. It could be weight gain or weight loss, even. A situational depression can also come in. I think there's insomnia, a lot of insomnia because of the sadness that comes in.
Yeah.
Um, it's, and if you have a close friend or someone who's going through a divorce and you start seeing a lot of these signs, you'll know. You'll know. I mean, and some people, from the fear and the anxiety and the stress, they have panic attacks, and if there's trauma involved in the form of betrayal or abuse of any type, that moves us into a whole different set of physical symptoms that need to be addressed, with a therapist.
Mm. Maybe medication. Yeah,
possibly.
I assume you also see, self-medicating more, drinking
Yes.
more, using drugs, using food, as
Well,
a
I see
drug.
more addictive behaviors,
Mm,
because it's just a form of numbing out. So some people will do shopping sprees, other people might gamble. Some people go right into a rebound relationship,
yeah.
even if it's temporary, because they're just finding ways to supplement either what the feelings that they were having in the relationship that they're now losing, the love, the affection, the attention. And there's also the numbing out from the process, and without realizing it, they're trying to give themselves a counterbalance. But there are a lot of other ways that there's strategies for helping to cope with the grief without going into self-sabotaging behaviors.
Hey listeners, it's Andrea Vacca here, your host of a Better Divorce podcast. If you're looking for ways to navigate your divorce with less conflict and more cooperation, my free ebook, Divorce Without Court, A More Peaceful Solution, can help you do just that. Divorce Without Court shows you how to reach an agreement without court involvement, from understanding mediation and collaborative divorce to learning how to keep your divorce under your control. This book covers it all. You'll even find practical checklists and first steps to help you move forward and guide you through the process. With over 3 decades of experience in family law, I've helped countless couples and families achieve peaceful solutions. Divorce Without Court puts that knowledge in your hands. Whether you're just starting to think about ending your marriage or if you're already in the process, this free ebook will help you have a better divorce. Why wait? Click the link in the episode description to download Divorce Without Court, A More Peaceful Solution. Take control of your future and move forward in your divorce with confidence and composure.
So how can someone mitigate the grief?
Well, first off, there are quite a few things actually. It takes time. That you have to understand that it's not an overnight thing, and that you're going to be circling, and that it's going to take time. And it could be a year, it could be 2 years. And if there's that trauma or betrayal or whatever's going on attached, that could take even longer. So it's important, to be a little realistic about it, but not because it's a bad thing, but only because it will allow you to be more accepting of the process when it hits you, when you have those moments when the grief catches you off guard and you're in your car crying. you know um, I really like to advise to perform a ritual that helps you tap into your innermost self, right? So this would require being alone. And to me, it's different for everyone. Some people like to engage in a bath, other people want to meditate. I personally like and suggest you do some sort of inspiring creative activity like art or dance or music, any kind of crafting, anything that really creatively gets you to use your inspiration. It could be cooking. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It's a very small thing, because what happens is that it takes all of your focus,
Mhm.
and it doesn't allow room for the monkey chatter of the brain to keep flat spinning you, where you keep reliving what happened here, what happened there, what didn't I do, what they didn't do. So you're not reliving the drama and the divorce. It allows you to take a time out, and
Right.
that's really effective.
Put your energy into something you're creating and loving, and you can be focused on. Yeah, I can
Yeah.
absolutely see how that can help.
So for emotions, to release emotions, obviously everybody knows any kind of physical fitness helps release the emotions from the body, which is excellent. But I really also recommend journaling for 2 reasons. It helps you put your feelings on paper. No one's going to read it. It could be a scribble, it could be a paragraph, it could be a line, it doesn't matter. But it also serves the purpose of allowing you to look back, and you can see the progress that you've made. Because sometimes when we're in it, we can't see the forest through the trees.
Right.
And this way, it gives us a little clarity, and we say, oh, wow, in 6 months' time, I'm here where I was, writing about all I was doing was crying
Right.
or
It gives you
angry or
perspective.
whatever.
It gives you perspective.
Yeah,
You can look
yeah,
back and see how far you've come or the gains that you've made, and that you're
right.
no longer in that place. You
Right.
you have moved on and you will continue to move on. Gives
Right.
you hope too.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So another thing is some people like to sit in silence. Other people like to talk, right? And they like to talk it out. And so it's very important to surround yourself with loved ones, especially if you have children, because you want to have that support around you. And if you have children, maybe someone can take the kids so you can get some alone time, just to kind of allow yourself to breathe a little bit, which is important. And for those who like to talk it out, it's important to set boundaries. So don't assume that your friends and your family are going to know what you need, because a lot of times they don't. They don't read minds in the moment. And there is nothing wrong with telling someone, this is what I need right now. Maybe you just want to talk and just have someone listen without commentary, you know?
Yes, and I think one thing I see is, in the beginning, your friends, your family will be on your side, and yeah, that person, the person you're leaving, they were never right for you, or they did these things, and I've always, they'll speak badly about this person, thinking it is helping you. But after a while, you realize it's not. And
Right.
I think setting boundaries with I need you to listen to me, not badmouth and make me feel worse, because I know it wasn't a great marriage. You don't have to keep telling me that, right? They think
Right.
they're supporting you, but it's not. It's bringing you
Right.
down. And
Right. And it's
yeah,
important. And that's so important because you really, and I tell this to all of my, clients that I counsel for grief, tell people what you need. You have to educate them on how to speak to you and what is appropriate in the moment or overall for them to be saying. You might just want to say, listen, I'm going to vent. I'm going to say a lot of things. Just listen. Or, just nod your head in agreement. I just need the
yeah,
support. You could tell me I'm off base, 2 months from now, kind
yeah,
of thing. And it's
right.
okay to say that,
Yes.
because as you go through the process, you're going to have a lot of thought patterns come up about the marriage. And which brings me to another point. It's and this is, I know this is very challenging and it kind of happens later as we move, we're further out from the divorce. Um, Try to focus on the positives of the marriage. You have to remember that at one point, this marriage brought you joy and happiness, and you've created children. If you have children, you've shared pets, you shared your life together. And, when things go sour, we tend to focus on that and not on the positives. And understand that honor the marriage for what it was and what it taught you about who you are.
Yes. Yes.
Because as we move away from it, it's very easy to get locked into that blame game. He said, she said, he did, she did. But the truth of truth is the marriage and your part in the marriage is about you. So when you understand that you were a part of that marriage, and that even if it didn't turn out the way that you expected it to, it taught you a lot about who you are and who you're going to choose to be moving forward and how you're going to move forward.
Right.
So it's important to honor that with gratitude, because that helps you to let go. And knowing that this was an experience and a piece of your life that taught you something very important about yourself.
Yes, about yourself, about what you need in relationships, what you
Mhm.
don't need in relationships.
Right.
It allows you to acknowledge your growth, because
Mhm.
somebody who is right for you and that you could put up with certain things when you were younger
Mhm.
no longer work for you, because you have grown or you have changed
Right.
in some way. So there's so much, and like you said, it's not going to happen on day one. You might take some time. You need to, some space from the end of the marriage. But I always do, like when I start working with clients, I'll always say, like, so what is working well still? Are you able to talk very well about the children? Are you on the same page with how you co-parent? Do you have similar values and parenting styles? Great. Let's use that as a base for what we can build on.
Yeah, that's a
Or
great
maybe,
approach.
finances are not an issue, and you're very much aligned with how you're going to deal with money. Great, but the children are so wherever the strengths lie in the couple still and what's working, let's build on that. And let's try to use us as an example for what else we can
Yes.
resolve the other
Yeah.
difficult issues.
Because relationships, and it's interesting because that's the third book. It's relationships are a teaching tool. That's how we learn about who we are. That's how we learn about not just what we need and what we want, but how we behave. What are we willing to tolerate? How are we loving ourselves? How are we treating ourselves? Because that's always indicative of how you're going to treat someone else. And so, and knowing that the marriage is part of your personal evolution as a human being.
Yeah. Right. So, okay. So, looking back and realizing that this was I see this as a learning opportunity, a growth opportunity. And what about the future? What advice do you have for people for how and when they can start looking forward? When is it the right time to start thinking about the future they want to have to get past the grief?
Well, it's your identity is going to shift naturally and organically once you start thinking about how you want to move forward. And the key is and I guess this kind of goes into like my tip or whatever you want to call it, but know that you're not alone. And know that once you start looking at the marriage from the perspective of what did it teach me, that puts you into the thought process of thinking, okay, how do I want to move forward? What does it tangibly now start to look like?
Yeah.
Right. And then you start thinking about the decisions you want to make, the goals you want to set. And it also puts you into the mindset of what's my purpose here? What do I really want to get out of life? It's not just the marriage itself, but it makes you ask those bigger esoteric questions. It's like, do I have a mission? Do I want to give back? Do I just want to be a parent? To whatever it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And when we start to focus on those questions, it automatically takes us into thinking about the future.
Yeah.
And it starts to give us a little bit of hope, and we start to make decisions and set goals. And all of this simultaneously together starts pulling us forward. And the grief just starts to dissipate on its own.
I love this. I can visualize, the grief is almost pushing you out of the marriage, or the sadness and dissatisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
And that could cause grief to know that it's ending, but you're being pushed towards something. Your grief, your sadness is pushing you away, but the future can pull you forward.
Yes.
Towards and away from the grief as well. So it's like
it's your optimism that's going to pull you forward.
Yeah.
And also your sense of intuition, because just the way we know that, and even it doesn't matter which party initiates it, because sometimes it's a mutual decision as well. But once we recognize that and we intuitively listen to ourselves, and if we're completely honest with ourselves and saying, was I settling? Was I in a comfort zone? Were we really, helping each other to be better together? What was really happening here? What were the reasons we went into this to begin with? Because those usually correlate to the reasons you leave.
Yep. Yeah.
Which I'm sure you see every day.
I do. And you need to take time. That's why, like you said, if you have children, if you have someone who can help take the children or, away for the day, and if also I like to tell my clients, it's really hard to be away from your kids and to think you won't be with them every night, when you're getting divorced. Think about the space you need. And this is an awesome, amazing opportunity to give yourself some space. Your kids are going to be fine. They're going to be with their other parent. Yes, you will miss them, but you need this time alone right now. So you can listen to your gut.
Yeah, I can personally attest to this because having been divorced myself and raising my son as a single parent, I was on 24/7, right? Because my ex left the country and we never saw him again. And so there were so many times that, someone might go to a sleepover or go away with a friend for the weekend or whatever it was. And I realized in that moment that I hadn't realized before, that I needed that time out for myself, that break. And everyone would say, well, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? It's like, nowhere. I want to just be. Just the absence of doing is enough
Yes. Right.
to sit with ourselves, right?
So look for those opportunities. All right. Well, I really appreciate talking about this. And again, following on the episode of betrayal, I think it was just perfect because there was
Yeah.
a lot of overlap there. And I appreciate your insight and your guidance. And as you mentioned, I had asked you to come prepared with your one better divorce tip. So just say it again. What is your one better divorce tip, Leda?
You're not alone. You are not alone in this. And don't be afraid to sit with your grief. Even when you feel that it's overwhelming you, at times it really isn't. Because a lot of times the way to cope with the grief is to go through it.
Yeah.
And to sit with it incrementally as much as you can and allow it to pass through you. It's a healing process. Grief is healing, and it's love that just doesn't have anywhere to go in that moment.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So, and know that that's what it is. It's
Right.
Grief and love are two sides of a coin, right?
Right. Just doesn't have anywhere to go in that moment. If you sit with it, it will.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank
Right.
you.
Right.
Well,
And
thank
it
you
will,
so much.
thank you so much for having me, Andrea. Much
Yeah.
appreciated.
How would somebody find you, Leda, if they'd like to know more about your work and how you help people in your counseling?
They can log on to my website at simplyleda.com. Super easy to remember, and everything is there. My videos, my podcasts, my books, they can access everything, my services through there. Then they can contact me through there as well. And if they'd like to, please do. I've been there personally and professionally.
Yes. And you've got a lot of good blogs too. A lot of good articles on there too.
Yes, thank
Yes.
you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you
Um,
so much for having me.
Yes. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe. This helps others who are seeking a better divorce to find us. This has been another episode of A Better Divorce Podcast, and we'll see you on the next episode. You've been tuning in to another episode of A Better Divorce Podcast with Andrea Vacca. Thank you for subscribing, leaving your positive comments and reviews, and sharing the show with others. You can watch episodes at vaccalaw.com, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And you can listen through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. Bye for now, and remember, you can have a better divorce.